So I had to so I just checked all that and it sounds good now.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Yeah, Justin texted me. He's like, "What happened with Shane's mic?" I was like, "I don't know. I don't know what you're talking about, man."
Yeah, I don't know what that was. It was weird, but yeah, I noticed that too. Like I noticed last week, I was like the gain, like as soon as I started, it was like really like it was peaking, and then when I tested it today, it just sounded like super distorted because it was way too peaky. So
Yeah, yeah. He said he would try to do his best to work around it. So
I'm just gonna scream the whole time. I'm gonna be Will Ferrell with voice modulation, and then that'll be the new sound on on the show.
perfect. That's all I ever wanted. All right,
I have a voice modulation.
I'm gonna test my own audio for a second. It is looking fine. Let's listen back. Perfect.
Hi, patron folks. We are
Oh,
recording
yeah.
processed foods.
Thank you for saying. I just hit record. I didn't say anything. Hi, welcome. Oh, and I remember to turn on transcripts this time. God damn it! Keep forgetting.
God damn it, such a fucker sucker.
Captions. English. Full transcript. Save. Closed captioning. It does not. I'm not seeing it actually happening on my end. That was the thing. Oh, there we go. Great. It says it is running, but I'm going to double check this. Show captions. There we go. Okay. Oh, I like that it added an exclamation point when I said, "There we go."
There we go. Here we go.
Thank you for recognizing my intonation, Zoom.
It's getting better and better every day.
I know it's magic of the world. I was gonna tell you something. What was it? I added my recommendation down below, which I think you did too.
Yes, I did.
Cool.
I started reading this book, Lords of Chaos. So I'm been really into metal lately, listening to more like black metal and stuff, and forgot about this band High on Fire that I really loved. And I was like, oh yeah,
I've heard
they're
of
so
them.
good.
There's a book in the Wheel of Time series called Lord of Chaos. It's kind of fun.
I love that.
Yeah. And then what else I watched recently? It's a couple things. Inside Man, that TV show that was really good. Um, wow, I have completely forgotten these two movies, Hypnotic and The Gift. I don't remember whether or not I liked them. But um, 37 meters down. That was the first time I'd ever seen that. That was pretty good.
Is that shark one?
Yeah. Okay.
I like it.
Let's record about. Oh, I should actually save this file as a
Let's talk about food. Food, glorious food.
And this is 298, 299.
Yes, it's $2.99.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I'm ready to go. Okay.
All right.
I count us down in 3, 2, 1, go. Welcome to Why We Do What We Do. I am your ultra processed host, Abraham.
And I'm your organic host, Shane.
We're a psychology podcast. We talk about the things that happen in psychology that happen to you and happen to your pets and happen in the world and really anything in between all of those things. Because, psychology is kind of everything that we do.
Yeah, and if you haven't learned by now, there are a lot of things that happen to us and around us and because of us. So there's never a shortage of topics.
Yeah, you've come to the right place if you did not know that and you wanted to learn it, because we're going to talk about it.
Yeah.
Is what's going to happen.
Eventually the show will be called All of the Things, all of the Why We Do's of What We Do's.
Yeah, all the
So,
things that we do and why.
yeah,
Or something like
exactly.
that. It doesn't have its catchy of a ring.
Well,
I
yeah,
feel like
we'll come up with something snappy for it.
Yeah, we'll workshop it. It's a we'll get there.
Every why for every what we do. I don't know. We'll get there.
Oh boy. And we are beep. If you like the show and you'd like to support us and you haven't already, then you should subscribe, review, like, rate, do all those sorts of things. You can join us on Patreon, pick up some merch, put down $100 on 23 red on roulette table for in our name, and give us the some split of the profits because we made the
Yeah.
suggestion. And I'll
Mhm.
talk more about how you can support us at the end of this episode. But this episode also drops on February 1st, and I would be remiss if we did not acknowledge that this is the date that kicks off Black History Month.
Oh yes, very, very, very good month. So I'm gonna kick it off listening to the wonderful Robert Johnson, who has just a cool story. If you're not familiar with him, he was a blues guitar player who supposedly sold his soul to the devil, um,
Wow.
in many, 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 many years ago. So very, very, a very interesting story there.
Jeez. And coincidentally, and aligning with that, this first week of February is also African Heritage and Health Week. So just do all the things with respect to Black people, I guess.
Yep. Yep. Agreed.
The good
What else
things,
is today,
not the
though?
bad things.
Yes,
Not
all the
like
good things. Yes.
not the problematic history that the United States has. Today is also National Girls and Women in Sports Day.
Okay. Good. It's also World Hijab Day.
It is National Freedom Day, which has to do specifically with the signing of the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which abolished slavery. So that makes a lot of sense that this would be the beginning of Black History Month and all that.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. It's also National Dark Chocolate Day, so we support that as
Yes.
big dark chocolate fans.
Yes. If you're into it, it is Robinson Crusoe Day. Recommended celebrations include reading Robinson Crusoe, watching Robinson Crusoe inspired movies, or as suggested by the website, hosting a Robinson Crusoe party. And if you don't know what Robinson Crusoe is, welcome to that world, I guess. I didn't know that it really existed in that large of a fan base, but apparently it started in 1999, so it's been going on for a little while at least.
You would think that would have happened earlier, but I guess people, it takes a little bit to catch up.
Sure.
It's also this made me laugh out loud. It's Spunky Old Broads Day.
Yep. Also initialized as SOB.
Yeah, yeah. So celebrate that attitude. Like for women, it's basically a celebration of women who are like aging, who want to celebrate their youthful attitude and like kind of their irreverence to the world. So I thought that was a pretty fun day.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of fun to be had. It is National Serpent Day for all you
Mhm.
herpetologists out there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, we have a gecko, but it's not quite a serpent. I don't think. I don't think he's a serpent. No, he's not a snake.
Getting there.
It's also, yeah, it's close. I mean, if you just take a couple legs away, and I guess he is. There's also not that I would. Don't worry, not that I
Yeah.
would. I
We
love
don't
him.
harm animals on this show.
Yeah, yeah, we don't harm. And Mondo is safe. Don't worry. It's also Cordova Iceworm Week, which sounds scarier than it is.
Yes, this takes place in Cordova, Alaska. The best way to celebrate is recommended is to go to Alaska to Cordova. These are very small little worms, but what's unique about them is that they thrive in these very, very, very cold temperatures, unlike most
Yes.
of their animals.
Yeah. Yes, but yeah, most worms don't make it there.
Yeah, it is Patient Recognition Week, particularly with respect to people who are medical patients.
Yep, and then it's also North American Inclusion Month. So I thought that was a pretty nice way to kind of bring everybody together, especially if you're interested in DEI work. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, largely meant to be around the inclusion of people with disabilities, particularly with respect to employment and education and other opportunities and that sort of thing. And that's now been more well recognized by the House of Representatives and certain legislation and that sort of thing. So
Yep, absolutely.
now, our actual topic today is discussing food and what that food does to us, particularly around our psychology.
Yeah, I feel like there's been a lot of discussion around processed foods and how they're dangerous for you or they're bad for you. But I think it's definitely worth kind of taking and obviously, this is a very big topic that's going to require a lot of different people to understand it. But we want to maybe take a stab at it. So we're going to start with talking about what processed foods are, and kind of understanding that before we start kind of going back to the idea that they are conspiring to destroy all of us. The term ultra processed food, or UPF, was coined by Carlos Monteiro, a professor of nutrition and public health at the University of Sao Paulo, Brazil, in 2010. So this is a fairly new phenomenon around the idea of ultra processed foods.
So, based on Monteiro's team analysis of the population's diet, and this is the population of Brazil, the people of Brazil, um, basically they were looking at what are people consuming. They wanted to know how much processed food, how much sugar they were consuming largely. And what they saw was that people were buying less actual sugar in like the raw form of sugar, like bags of sugar,
Yes.
right? But their consumption of sugar was increasing, and it was because that they were consuming a large amount and an increasing amount of these what they called ultra processed foods, which just they happen to contain a lot of sugar. So although they weren't buying sugar, they weren't necessarily putting sugar in everything that they made by manually adding it. The foods that they were buying just contained a lot of sugar because that's how they were created.
Yeah. And so it's is it Montero or is it Montiero?
Probably Montero. I think I probably screwed that up.
Okay. I don't know. I just want to make sure I was like, as we go through, I want to make sure that I'm not saying something. I don't want to get us in trouble. All right. Beep. So Montero actually developed a food classification system called NOVA, and it's not an acronym, so that's no fun. But that they actually categorize and ranked foods by their level of processing. And so Group 1 includes unprocessed or minimally processed foods like fruits, vegetables, eggs, meat, things that are pretty kind of like from point A to point B.
Well, although it is not an acronym, I think we should try and make it into an acronym just for fun.
Yeah.
I wrote this down somewhere. I can't find it. Beep. So maybe something like nutrient, obesity, uh, what's a good V word?
Violin.
Violin avoidance.
Yeah.
Nutritional obesity, violin avoidance. Sure.
Yeah, sure.
And the whole point of this, as you said, was to categorize and rank the food by how processed they were. And so they developed a four sort of level, if you will, system of how processed a piece of nourishment was considered to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so like we said, Group 1 is that unprocessed or minimally processed, those things like fruits, vegetables, eggs, meat, things like that are pretty straightforward. Group 2 is actually includes foods that aim to extend their shelf life. Things like fats, herbs, stuff like that tends to last a little bit longer. It's got to be processed a certain way with preservatives and whatnot.
Group 3 includes processed foods, which are defined by combining foods from Group 1 and Group 2. So you've got some of the shelf extended additives, plus you have your sort of minimally processed foods. And then by combining those, you get things like breads and jams. They're made up of relatively few ingredients, but they are like combining and mixing things together and that sort of thing.
Yep. And then you've got Group 4, which are considered the ultra processed foods that are usually including many ingredients, many ingredients that are considered as many ingredients such as food additives that improve palpability, modified starches, ingredients that are not used in home cooking, like soy protein, stuff like that. But that seems like a pretty big leap from Group 3 to 4. You go from kind of like, yeah, we're going to combine a couple things to ultra processed. That seems like there should be like maybe I kind of go back to Spaceballs, right? Like there's like super speed and there's ridiculous speed, then there's ludicrous speed. They're going from hyper speed to ludicrous speed already here, and they're skipping a bunch of steps.
Yeah, it does seem like there should be something between like we mixed a few ingredients to it's mostly chemicals that you're consuming.
Yeah, I mean, and that's exactly that's kind of. But I mean, who are we? We're not Montero, so
And we didn't actually say the reason that we are talking about processed foods is because there was a relatively recent hypothesis that came about that suggested that not only are processed foods bad for you, but they can affect your cognition, your ability to make decisions, and your overall intelligence. And so we're gonna dig into why all of this matters and how it applies. And at this point, you should be asking, what does processed mean when it comes to food? We've sort of outlined already what the groups are, but what does it mean, or what did Montero mean when he described processed foods? How do you rank something or qualify processed?
yeah, because I think I go back and think of the idea like most of our food is processed. Like I'm not, like I eat bread, but I'm not going out and grabbing like a stalk of wheat and just chewing on that, right? So like,
Why
so
not?
like it's got to be processed at some point in time. I mean, I don't know. I guess probably could, but Montero specifically defined food processing as, quote, by any method used to turn fresh foods into food products. This can involve one or a combination of various processes, including washing, chopping, pasteurizing, freezing, fermenting, packaging, cooking, etc. In food processing also includes adding ingredients to food, for example, to extend shelf life, end quote. So, I mean, the minute you cook food, it's processed according to this definition.
Yeah, and so to be clear, we are not advocating against washing, chopping, or cooking your food. Just want to make sure that we're clear on that. I
Yeah.
don't think that his or our or any reasonable person's goal is only eat group one foods unwashed. Like grab it
Right.
out of the ground with your teeth and like do not do anything else to it. I think there you can make food more readily available and safe to eat by going through things like washing it, through cooking it, and that sort of things. And that's okay.
Sure.
Just that those are parts of what he considered to be processing with respect to food. And it's not unreasonable to say that those are part of it. But just to say that, like, I guess just make sure we're clear that we're not saying we shouldn't do those things. It's clear that that makes those foods safer and more nutritionally available for us.
Yeah, I think if I were to kind of like break it down, I would say that his big issue is with group 4, those ultra processed foods. But
Yeah.
he needs non-examples. So like that's
Yes.
why you have groups 1 through 3. Like you need non-examples to be able to show like what this is why group 4 is a problem. So Montero actually and his team summarize their findings and the importance of them in this phrase. Quote, the most important factor now when considering food, nutrition, and public health is not nutrients and is not foods so much as what is done to food stuffs and the nutrients originally contained in them before they are purchased and consumed. That is to say, the issue is food processing, or to be more precise, the nature, extent, and purpose of processing, and what happens to food and to us as a result of processing. End quote. So his big thing is it sounds like processing and over processing is his big concern here.
Right. Now, as you'll remember, we came up with what NOVA might stand for, even though it's not supposed to be an acronym. We tried to make it into one. This is
Nutrient,
actually,
obese, violent avoidance.
there you go. This system was one of the most wide. I don't know if other people have tried to come up with classification systems similar to this, but this one has been adopted now pretty much worldwide. A lot of places around the world use this classification system to rank the relative level of processing and the foods that are consumed by the population. And this has been used to assess socioeconomic and demographic distribution of the dietary patterns, specifically within Brazil. And in the USA, NOVA has been utilized to assess the impact of ultra processed foods on the overall consumption of certain things, such as added sugar, which is definitely one that we've seen correlated more and more with adverse health outcomes.
Right. So ultra processed foods account for approximately half of all calories consumed by some developed countries, specifically looking at the United States and United Kingdom. So that's a fairly large chunk of the food that we eat is this ultra processed place, which means that there's a lot of added sugar in a lot of the foods we eat. I think I was surprised to learn that there was sugar in ketchup at some point in time. And I was kind of like, wow, that's pretty, why? But, everybody's got their reason, I guess.
Fair enough. One thing that's interesting here is that these ultra processed foods, part of the reason that they're successful, not the only reason, but part of it is that they tend to be even more affordable than less processed foods. You can pay $5 for a small container of strawberries or $3 for an off-brand box of Frosted Flakes, right?
Right.
And one of them is going to last a lot longer, going to feed a lot more people and have more calories, the Frosted Flakes. And one of them is not going to last very long, feed a relatively few amount of people and have very few calories, the strawberries. So
Right.
you can see that like you're spending more and getting less in both like volume and shelf life with low processed foods versus these ultra processed foods, which are convenient, they're easy, they're cheap, and they last forever.
Right. And I can hear like the nutrition advocates out there going, well, it's not actually that ultra processed foods are cheaper because you're spending more money long term on medical visits and da 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 da. I hear that kind of argument sometimes too, but we're not gonna kind of unpack that at the moment because I don't know that like.
Yeah,
what's
sorry.
that?
It's worth understanding that you're right that the long term the costs are going to be offset and weighed differently, but what we're talking about is like the decisions that someone makes to purchase these are the decisions in the moment of how much does this cost me right now,
Sure.
versus how much is this going to cost me down the road. Because and the other thing is like we don't actually know. We don't know if I eat this bowl of Frosted Flakes today. No reason to throw Frosted Flakes. Let's say Sour Patch Kids. If I eat this, this bowl of Sour Patch Kids today, I'm not going to see any explicit effects of that now or in the nearby or even in the far future. Like it's possible that I'll never see any effects of that, or at least it won't be directly linked to it in a way that I can understand that was what that decision led to. So I think that the immediacy of it is really important in understanding like why people would make that decision.
Right. And I think another part of that conversation too is accessibility, right? So like sometimes in some places, ultra processed foods are really the only food source that's available because you live in places that are considered food deserts. And that happens a lot on like in the US, it happens on a lot of like Native American reservations where they tend to be food deserts, and you see like rises in diabetes and other and obesity on reservations because of that. So it's like some interesting stuff. Like there's other things that like there's a concern with this, but we digress. We are off the beaten path. So while we find our path, while we turn, we take a step back and we get back on our path, we should probably listen to some ads.
Great segue and good timing.
Hey, thanks.
Okay, so we've been talking about what these ultra processed foods are, and then some advertisers sold you some ultra processed foods. And now we're going to try and get back to talking about why these are potentially problematic, or at least we'll first start by picking up where we left off, which is sort of what they are. And one of the things here is that they are, because we just talked about the fact that they were relatively inexpensive. And another thing is they're often heavily flavored. And that means that they'll also contain high amounts of sodium, sugar, fat, and saturated fatty acids. So not only are they cheaper and convenient and last longer, but they also tend to have a very robust flavor. And that's very easily controlled for. And another thing that I think is very attractive is it's very consistent. If you open that box of whatever, you're probably going to get the same product pretty much every time because it's manufactured product. They can replicate that process such that your quality is the same. When you get a box of strawberries, you don't necessarily know what the quality is going to be. So you have that sort of guarantee from the ultra processed foods is another consideration as to why someone was going to make the choice to go for something more processed over something less processed.
Yeah, I actually saw a really great kind of like an infographic type of thing explaining this and why it was coming from like an autistic advocacy group, and it basically just explained why you might find like some autistic learners will eat the same foods over and over and over again, and why they might have a hard time with fresh fruits. And they compared like Cheez-Its to blueberries, and you're like, if you take 8 Cheez-Its, they all look the same shape, they're all the same color, same texture, they taste the same. But if you take 8 different blueberries that maybe vary in size and shape and all that stuff, they're going to be tart, they're going to be sweet, they're going to be juicy, they're going to be not so juicy. Like they can vary so differently that it's the inconsistency can be kind of a unique problem. So it makes sense that people would gravitate towards ultra processed foods because they are just so consistent. They're processed so much that they are so consistent.
That's a really good point. I never actually thought about that before, and that really makes a lot of sense, particularly considering, like, in a lot of cases, these autistic folks do not have an easy way of advocating or communicating what they would like to have happen, and so without necessarily being able to like identify that, then at least what they have is something that's consistent, that they know that's like, well, I know at least know what to expect with this
Yeah.
particular product.
Yeah, exactly. So another part of these ultra processed foods is that they typically have a longer shelf life, and they're conducive to be eaten on the go. So you can kind of
Oh,
like
that's a
grab
good
a
point.
pack and run.
Yeah.
And so this makes them highly attractive to busy on the go people and families, but often leads to overconsumption by the consumer. And I would like to kind of illustrate a point here too. It's very easy
Okay.
for me to grab like a quick granola bar and throw it in my pocket.
Yeah.
One time I tried to put fresh fruit, like I was at work and I like grabbed a pear and I had a pear in my pocket and I got hit by the client I was working with and totally destroyed the pear in my pocket. So, I mean, having a pear in my pocket doesn't make any sense. And I understand that. I shouldn't have put a pear in my pocket, but I did and I had to. And then I ruined the pear. And so I don't carry any fresh fruit in my pockets anymore.
Do you put ice cream in your back pocket?
No, it's illegal, I think, in Florida.
It's been a while since we talked about that one. Fruit in the pocket is an interesting one, but you are
Listen,
right.
I
Like,
was young and dumb. It was before
no,
I
no,
graduated.
all good. The point is well taken. Like the wrapping on something makes it more portable, more easy to maintain, and that sort of thing. And so that is actually a really valid point. And that they also don't fit like as easily, you know, like a pear
Right.
probably, like your pocket's got to have some decent circumference to allow like a pear to go in there and hang out, and all
Yeah.
that. So I think those are all very valid points. The other thing to consider with respect to processed food, and this is another really important point in understanding like sort of why these predominantly exist. We've talked about, I think, many things, the convenience and the shelf life and the cost and all of that. But another one is that they are marketed very heavily, much more so than
Yes.
less processed foods. When was the last time you saw a commercial for like a rambutan, you know? Uh,
Right.
or lettuce or anything like that. Like nobody's like, at most what you're seeing is a commercial for a fast food place or some restaurant that's promoting something that has some of those fresh foods in it, but they're not probably pushing like a plate of blueberries, right? They're probably pushing like a pasta, and maybe that's got fresh basil on top, or they'll show like a picture of a salad, that sort of thing. So the marketing is just way more aggressive for more processed foods. And Oh, and then she gives examples versus chips and soda. Damn it. I ruined it because I didn't even read
That's good.
ahead.
No, you're good. I think that you make a good point though. Um, I mean, I can still remember the Chiquita Banana theme song
Oh,
from TV. Like I
yeah.
remember that, but that I don't remember the last time I saw a Chiquita Banana commercial.
Yeah.
So I mean, you're absolutely right. Like I can't imagine like a commercial coming up and just like some farmer going and be like fucking strawberries, like like nobody's doing that. But they're going like, I mean, like Frosted Flakes. They're like totally to come back. We're coming at Frosted Flakes. We're losing that
Apparently.
sponsorship. But think about that. Like Tony the Tiger is super. Like what his catchphrase is. Like what he looks like. I mean, it's like marketed for kids. And arguably, every bunch of bananas that I ever bought never came with a prize, but every box of cereal I did had one. So I mean, like there's other things that make it so like appealing to
Yeah.
purchase. And arguably we could thank Watson for that. Thank you for making marketing so powerful, I guess.
Yeah, there's that. And I was also thinking product placement, because I was thinking describing like eating potato chips and drinking sodas, like they'll specifically in movies and TV shows have like this one person always drinks a Pepsi, or this person's always eating Lay's potato chips, whatever it is. So there's brand placement that puts that prominently, but you don't necessarily see them carrying on an apple. I mean, you might for
Right.
some, like they might write that in as a quirky character detail, but I think more often than not, the paid product placement is going to get more screen time, more attention, and that sort of thing.
Sure.
So again, there's just a lot more marketing, and there's a higher profit margin for companies receiving more for highly processed foods than they do for minimally processed foods. Which I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I think there's without necessarily getting into all like diving into um, the marketing stuff behind it, but just understanding that first of all, they can use relatively little amount of raw material to create these ultra processed foods. Like one apple could probably stretch many boxes of like Apple Jacks, or something like
Right.
that, because they just extract a particular part of flavor and then can apply it as much as they want, from relatively little. And it's mostly chemicals at that point that you're consuming, as I said, and relatively little foodstuffs.
Yeah.
Just and then also a mountain of sugar. But yeah,
Yeah.
so
You
that's
hear that,
actually
Apple Jacks? We're coming for you too.
cereals are going down today. But anyway, the point being that like there's a ton of money to be made in these ultra processed foods, and so they tend to be much more in your face and sell well, and produce a lot of high profit for people who are the investors of those companies.
Sure. And I think maybe as we go into this next part, I think it's probably important to know, like, this is background information. I mean, you're probably very familiar with kind of how this process works and like understanding the types of foods that would fall into the category of ultra processed foods. So like that's not going to be
Totally.
anything that's like super mind blowing or like new or anything, but
Good point.
there are some other things that are maybe kind of important to talk about. So first, there is some research that shows a direct relation between ultra processed foods and obesity, hypertension, like high blood pressure, metabolic syndrome, which increases your risk of heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, in dyslipidemias.
Dyslipidemias, I think.
Okay. And dyslipidemias, which is the imbalance of lipids such as cholesterol, low density lipoprotein cholesterol, LDLCs, triglycerides, and high density lipoprotein, which is your HDLs. So like there's a lot of specific direct relations with ultra processed foods and specific adverse health risks.
All our biochemistry majors got all of that, and everyone else is like, okay, those are a lot of words.
Yeah, basically your cholesterol's off, you got too much fat in your system, like your blood pressure sucks. Like that's basically what we said.
Yeah, so we sort of, as you were saying, we've covered all the stuff that you already knew. Now 20, almost 30 minutes into this discussion, we get to the things that you didn't know. And one of those that was news to me, which was that the United Nations designated the years 2016 through 2025 with a goal of being the decade of nutrition as part of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals initiative, due to the, quote, evident multiple worsening threats to food systems and supplies, and thus to food security, human health and welfare, the living and physical world, and the biosphere, end quote. So they were going heavy at the importance of having both food security and high quality nutritious food as part of that.
Yeah, and just maybe I think it's probably worth unpacking the term food security for a minute. Like food security just being that there are ample resources for populations and communities so that there's no kind of concern with being out of food or food scarcity. Food scarcity obviously being like there is no resource here right now.
Yeah,
like whenever you have like when there's like when people kind of talk about like the baby formula shortage, like that's an issue of food scarcity. But now imagine that with multiple products in multiple places where maybe a certain region can't access that stuff. So we want food security for even rural populations and like where groups of people are living. We want to make sure that there's food security there. That's a big concern they're looking at here.
Yeah, and I think even if you look at cost, sometimes I think overly high priced foods can make food security happen even in places where food is available, but is priced at such a point that people who are at a certain income level cannot access it easily, and that also would qualify there.
Yeah.
All right. In 2016, the Global Panel on Agricultural and Food Systems for Nutrition, or GPAFSN,
we could come up with better. Yeah.
Published a report titled, quote, Food Systems and Diets Facing the Challenges of the 21st Century, end quote. And this report included advice and recommendations for leaders in those high-ranking positions of government and organizations, and outlines the NOVA system of food classifications that we described earlier, and discusses and supports that UN initiative of the Decade of Nutrition.
Yeah, so we want to share a couple highlights from this report. The first one is, this is a direct quote. Quote, if the direction of current policies remains the same, then estimates suggest that by 2030, the number of overweight and obese people will have increased from 1 out of 33 billion, or 1.33 billion? So
I think it's supposed to be a decimal.
Oh, that's weird. Okay, that's weird that it came over like that.
Yeah.
All right. will have increased from 1.33 billion people in 2005 to 3.28 billion around the world. So 1/3 of the projected global population at the time. And this is a major concern as no country to date has successfully reversed growth in obesity once it has been allowed to develop. So, and that's end quote. So that's a wild thing to think about. So once obesity starts to develop, nobody has been able to reverse it.
Right. Yeah. It's basically like it takes root like a fungus, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. It's real bad.
So again, in a part of this report, they also mentioned that in 2000, sales of ultra processed foods and beverages and the upper middle income countries were 1/3 of those in high income countries, meaning that in high income countries, there was much higher sales of ultra processed foods and the upper middle income countries. 15 years later, they were more than half, meaning that in those lower income countries, they went from being a third, those ultra processed foods being a third of their consumption to being half of their consumption. So a pretty large amount of growth where a lot more people are eating a lot more of their calories in the form of ultra processed foods based on this COVID categorization.
Right. And then another main point here they say is that sales of ultra processed foods and sugar sweetened beverages are growing. This growth is almost exclusively found in lower middle income and upper middle income countries. And sales of ultra processed foods in East and Southeast Asia are expected to approach those of high income countries by 2035. So basically they're saying that the sale of these foods and like the access to these foods is just increasing all over the world. And it's becoming a real problem.
Yeah, exactly right. So, hungry? Why wait? Grab an advertisement.
Nice. That was good.
Thank you. Okay, we are back and talking about, so we've sort of highlighted what ultra processed foods are and the classification system, how they're affecting the world, and now we get to sort of the pinnacle of this discussion here, which is what is this doing to our brain? And the reason for this, as we mentioned, is that there was this idea, this hypothesis that these ultra processed foods are not only bad for our health, potentially bad for overall nutrient diversity, potentially bad for making food accessible to people in areas where there is less availability of food and all they have is these ultra processed foods, all of that. But then there's also the problem that maybe it also causes this cognitive decline.
Yeah, and because we are a psychology podcast, that's probably what we should focus on. So a study in 22. So wait, did you do that point that a study?
I did not. No, I tried to make a very elaborate segue.
I like it. All right. So a study was completed in 2022. That was just last year. And their research question was, is the consumption of ultra processed foods associated with cognitive decline? Like we mentioned before, there are some data that show a relationship between kind of the ultra processed foods and their damaging effects on your health. But what about your cognition? What about your brain? What about your processes? What about the thing that governs your meat mech?
Nice. And so they collected these data in 3 waves, approximately 4 years apart. They started in 2008 and went to 2017. Participants were aged 35 to 74 and lived in 6 different cities in Brazil. Again, we've been talking about largely this all sort of started and spread from Brazil. And in the study there were a total of 10,775 participants, which is a pretty large N.
That's a large N. And they measured cognition by several different assessments: immediate and delayed word recall, word recognition, phonemic and semantic verbal fluency tests, and trail making part B.
I don't know what trail making.
What is trail making part B?
I tried to find out. I couldn't find it. But that's a part of it, I guess. A part of cognition measurement, whatever it is.
All right.
I'm gonna guess it's a type of cereal since we've been talking about cereal.
Yeah, it's the new brand of Kellogg's. Trail making part B. So
all right, ultra processed foods were represented as a percentage of the total daily energy consumption, and it was then divided into quartiles. And results showed that an increase in ultra processed foods above the first quartile showed a 28% faster rate of global cognitive beep, a 28% faster rate of global cognitive decline on those tests, and a 25% faster rate of executive functioning decline. And so basically what they, again, just to put this in sort of different terms, that the people who had the people who consumed more processed foods had faster and higher rates of cognitive decline and executive functioning decline.
Yeah. So, I don't like that. Now, there are a few issues with these data that we need to consider. First is attrition. So when you have that large a number of people in a study, you're going to lose some of those people, and especially over a long period of time.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah,
people are going to drop out. So like that's going to be a thing. You've also got something called maturation, which in a longitudinal study, the longer a study goes, people are going to gain more skills and they're going to learn more over time. And there's going to be other factors like the longer you go in a study, the more the organism is going to be exposed to variables that are beyond your control. And so as you grow and you develop and kind of like your body changes and all these things change naturally. So it's hard to kind of pinpoint what made those changes over a longer period of time.
Right. And I think that with respect to this in particular, they were sort of suggesting that people who, as they get older, maybe aren't as mentally quick. And that might be just due to the fact that as you get older, you might not be as mentally quick, and not necessarily due to the fact that it has anything to do with those processed foods. And so it's like maybe maturation was a relevant variable to consider in determining how performance changed on those cognitive tests over time.
Right. And a huge thanks to Jess who put the show notes together. And she adds the comment that she's definitely not as quick as she was 10 years ago. I am also in that same boat, so I appreciate that comment.
Yeah, that's fair. And then finally, another limitation to consider or issue with the study potentially is just that although there were a large number of participants, they were geographically isolated to Brazil only. So we don't know if this applies to other places around the world, other countries, other cultures, and that sort of thing. And so it's, we don't know if those rates would be the same somewhere else, would be different, would be more, would be less, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. So we would need to see a replication somewhere, which is, I think, pretty hard to do a replication of a longitudinal study. Like those data are going to not exist for some time. So there are some hypotheses, there is some speculation about this, and then from a holistic perspective, overall health issues may make it difficult to engage in focused, productive learning. So if you have health issues, then learning is going to be more difficult. But alternatively, principles of learning do not dictate the relative quality of food with respect to efficient kind of skill acquisition stuff. So in fact, using M&Ms is a trope in effective instruction and in behavior analysis that you'll see. But because it's a powerful reinforcer, we know that it works. It's for a lot of learners, sugar seems to be a really powerful reinforcer, myself included. I am part of that learner group.
Yeah, and you could also potentially consider that if there are certain activities, so if you are preparing meals, you're cooking, washing, reading recipes that use a lot of fresh ingredients and that sort of thing, that just general ritual and activity has a robust sort of skill set that if you aren't practicing that because you're consuming ultra processed foods, then you might see a lower performance just because you are not engaging as meaningfully with a daily task that requires you to think through, plan, prepare, and do all of these behavioral steps that require you to be sort of using your brain a lot and building and focusing that repertoire. So if there's something to this from a behavioral perspective, I would imagine that it lies in the kind of activities that are required to use and make and consume less processed foods, and that the convenience of the ultra processed foods means you just don't have to engage very much with that process, and instead what you probably do is zone out on a couch watching TV, or you just sort of hang out doing nothing, just snacking on something, and it's just there's not a lot of meaningful activity going on where you're practicing any kind of skill set or engaging in any kind of repertoire that would otherwise have you be learning and growing and benefiting. And that might be another reason that if there's something to this, that could be why.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think this question of ultra processed foods leads to more questions. And I think that's the thing that I would keep going back to as far as this goes. And we'll get to take home points in a little bit, but it's one of those things where I kind of sit back and I go, well, if this is the question we're answering or asking, but what about this? What about this? What about this? What about this intervention? What about lifestyle variables? What about genetic factors? What about medical history? I mean, there's other things to kind of pull out of this. Now, there are some other things to look at, and we need to consider criticisms of Nova, the nutrient obese violin avoidance, and ultra processed foods. One source made a really good counter argument about how foods are defined by Nova. So, for example, by Nova definitions, a high fiber breakfast cereal, a plant based burger, and a shot of rum are all considered ultra processed foods and are all equally unhealthy according to Nova. But a homemade brownie, a 16-ounce T-bone steak, and a beer are not ultra processed foods and are all considered equally healthy under those definitions. So you can see how there are lots of exceptions in this that make it a little bit difficult to classify some foodstuffs.
Yeah, exactly. Is that it gives the false promise of the health and nutrient quality of some foods just because they're minimally processed, when they might not be super healthful. Maybe iceberg lettuce would be sort of one to throw under the bus here, of like very minimally processed, not doing a lot for you.
Right. Celery.
Which I love celery, but yes, you're right. In terms of it doesn't pack a caloric punch at all. If that's what you're trying to do. So yeah, those are some things to consider. Is that another one? I think is just that this is the first and only real study that we have that makes this indication. We don't have a lot of other data, and we also don't have a lot of other conceptual reason to believe that in and of itself, ultra processed foods or even processed foods would have any effect on our ability to have effective cognition. Like from a neurological perspective, there's not really a reason to believe that that would necessarily be the case as far as we know. It's possible that more research will reveal that that's the case, but it's just worth considering that like this is the only evidence we have so far, and we don't know how robust it is given the limitations of the study, given the other variables that we've already described. So there might be something there, but I think we just need a lot more research before we land on the idea that you shouldn't eat ultra processed foods or to condemn ultra processed foods, particularly considering how many people in the world that's all they have access to in terms of nutrition. And so if we take away the little access that they have to things because we're so concerned about ultra processed foods, then they've got less, and arguably in some cases nothing, and starving is arguably worse, I would think, than probably eating ultra processed foods.
Starving is probably worse for your cognition than eating something sugary. Exactly. I would imagine.
Our brains are very calorically hungry organs in our body. They consume so much of our nutrients.
Yeah, and I think you make an excellent point here, and I think that's the thing that I would unpack with this too, is the idea that a lot of the argument is stemming from this idea that an ultra processed food is the thing that's causing cognitive decline, and we already know like that there are, from like a nutrition standpoint, that there are foods that tend to be they're processed better for you, that are useful for you, like things like complex carbohydrates and proteins and stuff. We know that those things are really impactful for the way that our body operates, but we arguably don't have a lot of information on how that stuff works. Like in a really, I mean, truly, when you get into the science of it, like we don't really have a lot of understanding about how that all works. So when you have nutritionists out there and you have people that are like gurus on this stuff, they're basing it on science that is not, I don't want to say flimsy, that's not the word I'm looking for, but it's incomplete.
That's a good, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah. So that's something to think about.
Yeah, 100%. So I think I agree with all of that, and I sort of feel like we're now leading into our take home points here. And so I think, just as I was sort of saying, one big take home point here is that, as we've mentioned several times, that many people around the world and in the United States have these food insecurities, and they depend on foods that are available only really in the form of ultra processed foods. So I think we should avoid being too quick to dismiss them because of their potential for impact on cognition, when we don't really understand what all those factors might be and if that relation actually exists. And it's one of those times to sort of, we need to check our privilege here, understand that there are people who don't necessarily have access to those healthiest foods and all those sort of products, and that there are some people who are nutritionists who argue that we should be eating more ultra processed foods for the very reason that they have that prolonged shelf life, that we can control for the relative nutrient quality of those foods, that they're consistent, and that they can be then readily available to people who don't have as easy access to safe consumable foods. And so like there's a whole other argument that goes the opposite direction, saying we should be eating more of these. And so that's, I think,
Yeah.
one, I guess, has sort of introduced a new idea into a take home point. But my main take home point being just like, let's make sure that we're not being too quick to dismiss these as being demonic, these evils of the world, when in some places they're kind of very necessary.
Yeah, and I think to that point, I mean, we do have there's quite a bit of data on how high sugar and fats actually increase chances for health concerns. Like there's
Sure.
been quite a bit of studies on that stuff. However, there is very little on how much of that actually impacts the way that we behave or how we look at the world or any of those things. Like cognition is one of those things that simply there's not sufficient data to support foodstuffs being like the thing that impacts your cognition. So I think with that being said, I would take this with a grain of salt, or a grain of sugar, if it's unprocessed. But take it with whatever, because I got grain of herbs, whatever it is. But think about this. I mean, it's a worthy scientific question. I think it's a fair scientific question, and I think it's worth unpacking, and I think it's worth exploring. However, we are not at the place to make conclusions. And for anybody who is making conclusions on this, you should be skeptical, because there's just not sufficient evidence to make that type of claim.
Yeah, we're not medical doctors. Of course, eating a balanced diet, which we could do a whole episode on the food pyramid in the United States that was put forth by the FDA. And generally moderation, that's probably going to lead to a healthier lifestyle. Consult your doctor, your nutritionist about what your nutritional needs should be. Again, we're not diagnosing or really recommending anything directly.
Right.
And I think it's important, just as you were mentioning cognition, I forgot to even talk about this earlier, but like measuring what cognition is and how it's working and how effective it is something we have the most tenuous grasp on. Like
Right.
we don't really have a great way of measuring how effective your cognition is enough to trust that a measurement we get shows actual decline. So like that's just another point to consider in terms of that skeptical angle here. But I think the question is ultra processed food making us dumber? Probably not. But we also are lacking enough data for us to say one way or another what that is, what that means, and the effect that it's really having, ultimately leading to try and eat as nutritious food as possible, given the availability of that to wherever you are, and that like ultra processed foods are probably a acceptable way to go, given the caveats of what we understand about how those also work in our bodies.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I think you nailed it.
Cool. Well, let's get to some recommendations.
I got my next one.
I'm gonna recommend a TV show that I just finished. It was 3 seasons. The last season just came out. It is based off. So this is His Dark Materials is the name of the TV show. This is based off of the books His Dark Materials series by Philip Pullman. I think it's Philip Pullman. Am I saying that right? I don't think I have it in here. Well, I'm gonna Google that really quick.
It sounds right.
It's Philip Pullman. Okay, good. Beep. Adapted into a TV show by HBO, so they tried to make a movie out of this, the Golden Compass, years ago. That was the name of the first book in the series, and so basically every season represents one of book in the trilogy, and two things to sort of comment on. One is that they follow the books relatively closely, enough so that I think fans of the books are going to appreciate how the series did. And two is they really stuck the landing. I think if nothing else, they really wrapped it up in a really nice way, in my opinion. So if you have access to HBO, if you're a fan of that series, I do recommend the HBO series His Dark Materials. I think it worked out really well.
I love that. That's so great. I'm here for that.
Cool.
All right. So my recommendation is a band. I feel like it's been a little bit since I recommended a band. Maybe not. I don't know. But this band is a very metal band. If you are somebody who likes Motorhead, then you might like this band. And this band is called High on Fire, which is such a great name for a band.
Indeed.
So I think the first record I heard by them was an album called Blessed Black Wings in 2005. And it looks
Hold on.
like, it looks like, I would say, if Meatloaf were scary. Like, it looks like the cover of Bat Out of Hell, where it's like, like there's like the demon and all that, but it's like it is a
Okay.
demon with big black wings and it's scary. With songs like Cometh Down Hessian and Blessed Black Wings and Anointing of Seer. All of those things
Wow.
are, Songs of Thunder, and they go on. There's Death is This Communion, Snakes for the Divine. Their last album was really good. It's called Electric Messiah, and it is awesome. The first song is called
Nice.
Spewed from the Earth, and it's just very metal. It's three dudes, and they just play really good, like Motorhead influence, kind of like speed metal like that, and it's a lot of fun.
Fun. Dig it.
Yeah.
All right. If you're a big fan of ultra processed foods, or you're a big fan of not very processed foods, and you just like to pull them right out of your garden with your teeth and chew them on the spot, we'd like to hear from you wherever you fall on the spectrum of those two things. Tell us what your thoughts are. Tell us what we got wrong, what we got right. If you are maybe someone who uses Nova or a fan of that system, we'd also like to hear from you. And of course, if you'd like to tell us about a TV show or a heavy metal band or any type of band you're into lately, we like hearing those things as well. You could reach out to us directly by emailing us at info@wwd.podcast.com. We're also on all the social media platforms, recently on Tumblr. Looking at some other ones as well that are out there. So maybe just looking around, because so many of them have turned into these alt-right hate speech platforms, and there's seems to be a lot of those. So we're not going to do that thing, but we're going to do normal social media things and trying to find outlets for that. So join us over there. Together we can help try to promote platforms that are not so oriented to disinformation,
Yes.
and use of racial slurs and bigoted language and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Absolutely. 100%.
Big thank you to the Disseminating Behavior Analysis Special Interest Group for their continued support of the show, and their contributions that help keep us going. In addition, if you would like to support us, that you can head over to our merch store, pick up a mug, a beanie, shirt, a sweater, stickers, all kinds of fun stuff that you can then put on your traveling backpack as you take with you when you go through hiking through the Amazon or something. What's left of it. The people who have already on Patreon, if you join us there, you get access to things like early releases of episodes, ad-free episodes, behind-the-scenes content, all that sorts of thing. And there's a group of people who've already made that leap, and to them we are eternally grateful. And that includes Amanda, Brad, the Daily BA, Joshua, Justin, Justine, Kelly, Kim, Kostia, Layla, Megan, Mike M, Mike T, Shauna, Stephanie, and insert your name here, listener, because you can be a part of that tribe of wonderful people, and this fun little community we've got going on. In addition, special thanks to Jess for helping to put together the notes for this episode. Of course, thank you to Patrick Allen. Beep. Special thanks, or beep. Thanks to Patrick Allen, and of course, Justin for his work on helping us turn this audio mess of ours into a discernible episode. And then thanks, as always, Shane, for recording with me today.
Thank you for having me.
And of course, thank you to our listeners, without whom this would not be possible. I don't think that I missed anything. Is there anything else that I am forgetting before we wrap up here?
No, I think that covers it.
Perfect. This is Abraham.
And this is Shane.
We're out.
See ya.
We've been hitting right around this 50-ish minute mark. I'm really happy with this. It's really good.
Yeah. No, that's nice. Yeah, it's feeling real good.
Yeah. All right. Let's put this on a pedestal.
Right. Da-da-da.
Okay. Exporting.
All right. And mine is exporting in a second.
I don't think we did a third ad break. Whoops.
That's okay.
Maybe we did. Damn, I don't remember.
We didn't.
Okay.
All right. Mine is exporting now too. It says 23 seconds.
Cool. we have been having, so we've maintained a steady rate of gaining new followers on Spotify for a very long time. And we've averaged one a day every day for like a couple of years now.
That's pretty
Um,
rad.
yeah, so we're at over 1,200, which I'm really excited about, which is really cool. But recently, we've been starting to average a little more than one a day. In the last like
Really?
month or so, yeah, which was very uncommon for like this time of year in like December. But
Yeah.
there was one week we got like maybe it wasn't 20, but it was like 15 or something, and then it's been like 8 or 9 per week or something like that, really consistently. So it seems to be maybe growing a little tiny bit faster, just a hair, just a shred.
That's cool.
Um,
I mean, it's weird, but it's cool. Like
yeah,
it's I wonder what's going on.
it's kind of how I felt about it too. There is this weird little banner at the top of the Spotify page that said like we're unable to process data, but um, yeah, I don't know.
Hmm.
1,251 followers we are now at. So
That's awesome. Well, thank
yeah,
you, patrons, for being part of that group.
yeah. I'll be excited to see. I'm excited to shoot for when we get to that 1,500 mark, and then 2,000, all that. Just keep doing what we're doing. But
Yeah.
our
That's
John
why
B.
we do
Watson
what we do.
episode got so many plays relative to others.
That's weird and interesting. Maybe because you said bad parent and then the title.
Maybe. Um,
So,
all right. Well, let's go ahead and cap this one for our Patreon supporters. Thank you for listening, Patreon people.
bye, patrons. Thank you.